almost a stunned silence in the courtroom. George Zimmerman, on trial for his life, really barely flinched when he heard that. His family was sitting in the gallery behind him, obviously happy, but quietly happy. Some hugs, some smiles, no sound whatsoever. George Zimmerman, then and there, his GPS anklet was removed. He's been wearing that on house arrest. He gets his bond back. He gets the gun that killed Trayvon Martin. He gets to have that back too. And on the other side of the courtroom, the prosecutors sat quietly. Obviously, if you look at their face, you could deduce they were disappointed, maybe a bit frustrated. But again, very quiet and quick proceeding in that courtroom. Outside, downstairs, let's talk about those demonstrators you've seen here over the past couple of days. It was a Saturday evening. It was a long, long night. Many of them had gone. And then the people who stayed when they heard the verdict, you hear them chanting now, but really at the news, it was just this stunned, confused silence. The people that we talked to, they were just sort of confused. How could a teenager die, they say, and nobody pay for that? Of course, there are many people who are still convinced that Trayvon Martin was racially profiled by Zimmerman that night. But here are people who have a very definite take, a very definite perspective, and in many cases don't understand the details of Florida's legal process that culminated in this acquittal. So all this scrutiny and all of this evidence that we've seen over the past 16 months since this happened, really, Nikki, Todd, there is sort of evidence that it hasn't really changed the narrative, that people are still polarized on the side that they have taken, either supporting George Zimmerman, angry for Trayvon Martin, and these two men will no doubt be linked in the history of the discussion of race relations, really nationwide, I think.
Glenna, a lot of people were outraged in the beginning of this case when Zimmerman was not initially charged. A special prosecutor was brought in. We heard from her last night, and even though she lost this case, she was very positive about the way she went about it. Did she say anything in there that she would have done differently to get a different outcome?
She did not. They stand behind her case, and it's interesting that you brought up, if you remember, the reasons given by the Sanford Police Department initially for not arresting George Zimmerman is that they said that night they took him in, they saw his injuries, they heard his account of his own self-defense, and under Florida's stand your ground law, they had no legal basis to refute that, and so no legal basis to arrest him. That's why he was not arrested initially. And then, of course, in the weeks that followed, when the news of this unarmed 17-year-old boy who was killed this way got out, there were massive protests. This little city of Sanford just became a roiling hotbed of people aching for an arrest, aching for someone to pay. And then you had Trayvon Martin's parents who had come forward to say, justice to us would be the process. Put George Zimmerman through the process. Nikki, Todd, they got that.
All right, Glenna Milberg, thank you so much. And now we want to turn to our Local 10 legal analyst, Lee Stapleton, to talk about that process. She has been with us since the very beginning of this trial. And Lee, much has been made, at least in the media, about this all-woman jury. How do you think that played out? And did it make a difference?
Todd, I've been sort of entertained by all this. Nikki, you and I are women. We both do TV. We have so much in common, but we're different people. We have different views. So it was with those jurors. There was this view that they were this monolithic entity because there were 5 moms and it was going to be bad for the defense. And at the end of the day, that was a bunch of baloney. They came from different backgrounds, like most jurors do. They probably had very different opinions about things and life experiences, and they reached a verdict. But the fact that they were all women, I don't think it particularly cut one way or another. And in a case where profiling has been such a big issue, it seems to me that this juror was profiled or stereotyped as an all-woman jury, thinking that they were going to be squishy and kumbaya-ish or whatever the thought was. And instead, they went in there, they did their work, and they reached a verdict in 16 hours.
Still, Lee, people feel men and women think differently. What about if it had been an all-male jury, or if they had some men on the jury? Do you think that would have resulted in a different outcome?
I don't, Nikki. I think the evidence either is there or it's not there. And in this case, it wasn't there. there was a lot of talk yesterday. I was listening to all the commentary during the day while we waited for the verdict, that what a huge mistake the defense had made by not having guys on that jury. And a guy would have explained, I guess, to the little women on the jury that, you know, what it's like to be in a fight and what self-defense was. And these women understood it. They got it, that George Zimmerman, his defense was there. They looked at his injuries or whatever it was. They concluded. So I don't think if it was all men, all women, mixed, or extraterrestrials. If the evidence is not there, they're going to reach a not guilty.
Lee, we know that that ankle bracelet that Zimmerman was wearing has been cut off, that he's also going to get his gun back. He is now a free man. What happens to George Zimmerman now?
I think George Zimmerman becomes the punchline in a joke for the rest of his life. I think he's going to be like Monica Lewinsky in that way, that this case has been so publicized that he's an infamous guy. For the foreseeable future, he's going to be involved in lawsuits. He's going to sue people. I know he's got a suit against a network. There's talk of suing him, and that'll keep him busy for a while. But what does happen to him? I guess he can finish his education, but I think it's going to be tough because he is always going to be identified with this shooting.
Do you think he'll write a book?
I was thinking about that, Nikki, whether he writes a book. And wouldn't it be a boring book? Like, what does he have to say? This was the defining thing in his life. He isn't that interesting of a guy. He hasn't done that much with his life. I think the interesting book would be if any of the jurors wrote the book. But George's book, he may write one, but I'm not really sure he'd buy it or read it.
Lee, do you think there'll be a civil suit? You know, so many times we see in the OJ case that they don't get a conviction, but then they sue the person.
And the outcome can be much different.
There could be a civil suit, although generally I don't know that this one is going to be successful. The OJ suit was kind of an unusual set of circumstances, but I think when you have an acquittal the way you do here, it's unlikely that the family's going to be successful, but there's plenty of lawyers involved with this case. There's going to be plenty of litigation. I'm wondering if George Zimmerman is going to file some lawsuits of his own.
Lee Stapleton, thank you so much for coming in this morning and giving us your insight into this legal process. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.